Surprise! Mom's moving in with us, my husband declared at our anniversary party. You'll adapt, I always do, she smirked, locking eyes with me. But her smile faded fast when I grinned, took out a folder, and said, "Make that a double celebration, turns out, so do I." Can you imagine spending 5 years building a life with the man you love, only to have his mother completely undermine your marriage, brick by brick? And then, on your anniversary, your husband drops a bombshell announcement that literally changes everything. But what he didn't know was that I had a surprise of my own, a secret weapon for survival. My name is Samantha Richards, and at 34, I never imagined my 5-year anniversary would end with me dropping a bombshell on my husband, Jackson. We were supposed to be celebrating our love story, not dealing with his mother Sylvia's smug face as he announced, "Double celebration today. Mom's moving in with us." The room went silent as Sylvia turned to me with that familiar, condescending smile. "You'll adjust, dear." "I always do." She smirked, looking straight at me. But her grin disappeared when I smiled back, pulled out a document from my purse, and said, "Not this time. I've always been the type of woman who plans ahead. It's probably why I excelled as an architectural designer, creating spaces where every detail matters." That attention to detail extended to my personal life, too. I had a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, and dreams that stretched far beyond that. Meeting Jackson wasn't in any of those plans, but sometimes life gives you something better than what you imagined. We met at a charity gala 7 years ago. I was there representing my firm, which had donated design services for a community center. Jackson was there supporting his friend's organization. He approached me at the bar with a genuine compliment about a point I'd made during my brief speech, not about my appearance or my dress. That alone made him stand out. "Most people don't understand how architecture affects our psychological well-being," he said, extending his hand. "Jackson Thomas. I found your perspective fascinating." Our conversation flowed effortlessly, from the impact of public spaces on community development to our favorite coffee shops in the city. By the end of the night, we'd exchanged numbers and made plans for dinner the following week. Our relationship progressed naturally. Jackson was thoughtful, communicative, and seemed to value my independence as much as his own. He was a high school history teacher who coached basketball after school, passionate about shaping young minds. I loved how he would get animated discussing historical events or his students' breakthroughs. We both worked hard but made time for each other. Within a year, we were discussing marriage. That's when I first met Sylvia Thomas. Initially, she seemed pleasant. A retired nurse with an active social life and volunteer schedule. She welcomed me with a warm hug and homemade dinner at her place, asking thoughtful questions about my work and background. But there was something beneath the surface, a subtle possessiveness over Jackson that I noticed but dismissed. "Jackson has always been my special boy," she said multiple times that night, each time squeezing his arm or straightening his collar like he was still a child. "He takes such good care of me since his father passed." The warning signs appeared gradually after our engagement. Sylvia began dropping by our apartment unannounced, always with some excuse about being in the neighborhood or having baked too many cookies to eat alone. She'd inspect our space with a critical eye, running her finger along shelves, checking for dust or rearranging items in our kitchen to be more efficient. "Jackson likes his coffee mugs arranged by size," she'd say, reorganizing our cabinet. "I've always done it this way for him." When I gently mentioned that Jackson had never expressed such preferences to me, she'd smile tightly and say, "Well, dear, there are some things only a mother knows." After we married and bought our house, Sylvia's behavior intensified. She had opinions about our furniture arrangement, our garden choices, and especially my cooking. Nothing was ever quite right. Jackson would give me apologetic glances, but rarely stepped in. "That's just how Mom is," he'd say after she left. "She means well." I tried to establish some boundaries without causing conflict. I suggested we set specific days for family dinners rather than impromptu visits. I asked Jackson to give me advance notice when his mother was coming over. He agreed to these reasonable requests, but often forgot or got guilt-tripped by Sylvia into changing plans. "She sounded lonely," he'd explain. What was I supposed to do? Despite these challenges, we built a good life together. We both advanced in our careers, traveled when we could, and talked about starting a family someday. Our 5th anniversary was approaching, and I wanted to make it special. I planned an intimate gathering at our home with close friends and family, catered by Jackson's favorite restaurant. I spent weeks coordinating details, wanting everything to be perfect. What Jackson didn't know was that I had been working on another project simultaneously, one that I hoped would strengthen our marriage, but could also serve as my safety net if needed. The increasing tension with Sylvia and Jackson's reluctance to address it had planted seeds of concern. I loved my husband deeply, but I was beginning to question whether he could ever truly prioritize our marriage over his mother's demands. The day of our anniversary party arrived. The house looked beautiful, with subtle decorations that reflected our journey together, photos from our travels, mementos from significant moments, and flowers in the colors of our wedding. As guests began to arrive, I felt a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. This night would mark a turning point in our marriage one way or another. What I didn't expect was that Jackson had his own surprise planned, one that would change everything. Our anniversary party was in full swing by 7 o'clock. The spring evening was perfect, warm enough for guests to spill onto our back deck, but cool enough for comfort. String lights twinkled overhead, casting a soft glow on the 30 or so friends and family members who had come to celebrate with us. The catering staff moved efficiently through the crowd with trays of appetizers and champagne flutes. The playlist I'd carefully curated provided a pleasant backdrop to the hum of conversation. I was in the kitchen checking on the anniversary cake when I felt Jackson's arms wrap around my waist from behind. He smelled faintly of cologne and the scotch his brother had brought as a gift. "Have I told you how beautiful you look tonight?" he whispered against my ear. I turned in his arms, smoothing the front of his navy button-down. "Only twice, but I don't mind hearing it again. You've outdone yourself with this party, Sam. Everything is perfect." I smiled, feeling a flutter of anticipation about my own surprise. I wanted tonight to be special. "It is," he assured me, taking my hand. "Come on, I think it's time for a toast." We rejoined our guests in the living room where Jackson's brother, Kyle, had already distributed champagne. Jackson led me to the center of the room and raised his glass. The chatter died down as everyone turned their attention to us. "First, I want to thank everyone for coming tonight to celebrate 5 amazing years with this incredible woman," Jackson began, his free arm around my waist. "Samantha, you've made these the best years of my life. Your strength, your passion, your unwavering support. I'm grateful for it every day." My heart swelled at his words. This was the Jackson I fell in love with. Thoughtful, appreciative, loving. "As many of you know, family means everything to us," he continued, and I nodded, squeezing his hand. "Which is why I'm so excited to share some news that makes tonight a double celebration." I looked up at him, confused. We hadn't discussed any additional announcements. For a wild moment, I wondered if he somehow knew about my surprise. Jackson beamed at the curious faces around us and declared, "My mother is moving in with us." He paused. "After months of discussion, we've decided it makes the most sense for Mom to sell her house and come live here permanently. We have the space, and it'll be wonderful to have her close as we start thinking about the next chapter of our lives." The room seemed to tilt beneath my feet. Asterisk months of discussion? Next chapter? Asterisk this was the first I'd heard of any of it. I maintained my smile through sheer force of will, but inside I was reeling. I scanned the room and found Sylvia standing near the fireplace, practically glowing with triumph. When our eyes met, she raised her glass in a small salute. The guests' reactions were a mixture of polite enthusiasm and visible discomfort. Some offered congratulations while others shot questioning glances my way, clearly sensing this wasn't a joint announcement. "Wow, that's big news," my best friend Dana said carefully. "When is this happening?" "We're aiming for next month," Jackson replied confidently. "Mom's already accepted an offer on her house." Each word felt like another blow. I stood frozen beside my husband, my champagne glass clenched so tightly I feared it might shatter in my grasp. "Samantha has been so supportive," Jackson added, giving me a squeeze that felt more like a vice. "Haven't you, honey?" All eyes turned to me. I forced myself to nod, not trusting my voice. The moment was saved by Jackson's cousin announcing it was time for cake, and the crowd's attention shifted. As guests moved toward the dining room, Sylvia approached us, her designer pantsuit immaculate as always. "Isn't this wonderful?" she gushed, patting Jackson's cheek. "It's like things are coming full circle. Now I can help around the house while Samantha focuses on her career." I felt my cheeks burn at the implication that I wasn't managing our home properly. "Plus," she continued, lowering her voice conspiratorially, "I'll be right here when grandchildren come along. Heaven knows you'll need the help with your work schedule." Before I could respond, she turned to me with that familiar, condescending smile. "You'll adjust, dear." "I always do," she said, her eyes holding mine in silent challenge. In that moment, I flashed back to a conversation Jackson and I had just 3 months earlier. We'd been discussing our future plans over dinner when I broached the subject of his mother. "Your mom mentioned again today that she's thinking of downsizing," I'd said carefully. She hinted at moving closer to us. Jackson had shaken his head firmly. "Don't worry about that. Mom talks about moving every few years, but never does anything about it. She's too attached to her house and her friends. Besides, I wouldn't want her living with us. That would be too much." The memory of his reassurance made the betrayal cut even deeper. As I stood in our living room watching Sylvia bask in her victory, something shifted inside me. The document in my purse, which I'd planned to present as a symbol of our future together, now represented something entirely different. I watched Sylvia walk away, her hand possessively on Jackson's arm as she steered him toward other guests. My initial shock was crystallizing into resolve. I wouldn't cause a scene at our anniversary party, but I wouldn't sit quietly and accept this ambush either. The time for accommodation was over. I reached for my purse, feeling the weight of the folder inside. My surprise had just taken on new significance, and I intended to use it. The tension at our anniversary party wasn't born in a vacuum. The friction between Sylvia and me had been building for years, escalating from minor irritations to significant boundary violations that threatened the foundation of my marriage. 6 months after Jackson and I got married, I came home from work one day to find our living room completely rearranged. The sofa faced a different wall, the coffee table had been moved, and our reading chair was now positioned by the window. I stood in the doorway, disoriented in my own home. "Surprise!" Sylvia emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "I let myself in with the spare key Jackson gave me. Doesn't the room flow better now? It was so closed off before." I struggled to keep my voice even. "Sylvia, I appreciate your effort, but we had the furniture arranged that way for a reason. The previous layout worked better for how we used the space." Her smile dimmed slightly. "Well, give this a try. Jackson always trusted my eye for design when he was growing up. You two can always move it back if you really don't like it," she added, though her tone suggested she expected no such thing. When Jackson came home, he seemed pleased with the change. "Mom's always had a knack for making spaces feel bigger," he commented, oblivious to my discomfort. That night, I brought up the issue of his mother having a key. "I feel uncomfortable coming home to find the house rearranged without any warning." "She was just trying to help, Sam," he replied. "Mom gets bored sometimes now that she's retired." "I understand that, but our home is our private space. I would appreciate a heads up before she comes over, especially if we're not here." Jackson agreed half-heartedly, but nothing changed. Sylvia continued to drop by unannounced, often when she knew I'd be at work and Jackson would be home. I'd return to find little things altered, kitchen cabinets reorganized, new decorative items appearing, or my carefully curated bookshelves rearranged by color rather than subject. As my career advanced and I took on more responsibility at my firm, Sylvia's comments about my professional ambitions grew increasingly barbed. "It must be nice for Jackson to have leftover takeout 3 nights a week," she remarked after spotting containers in our refrigerator. When his father was working long hours, I still managed to put a home-cooked meal on the table every night. Another time, when I mentioned being considered for a promotion that would involve some travel, she shook her head sympathetically. "I don't know how that would work with starting a family. Jackson has always wanted children. You know, he was such a natural with his younger cousins." The implication was always the same. My career was selfish, an impediment to what she believed a wife should prioritize. The criticism extended beyond my professional life. Sylvia had opinions on everything from how I loaded the dishwasher to the way I folded Jackson's shirts. "He prefers them folded this way," she'd say, refolding laundry I just put away. "I've always done it like this." Family gatherings became exercises in restraint. At Thanksgiving dinner with Jackson's extended family, I shared news about a sustainable housing project my firm had recently completed. "That's nice, dear," Sylvia interrupted, patting my hand dismissively before turning to the table. "But the real excitement is that Jackson's basketball team is heading to regionals this year. Tell everyone about that, honey." I watched my husband launch into a story about his team, his mother beaming beside him. My accomplishment was forgotten, deemed less important than his. It was a pattern that repeated at every family event. My voice minimized, my achievements diminished. The holidays were particularly difficult. During our second Christmas as a married couple, Sylvia surprised us by arriving 3 days before Christmas Eve, suitcases in tow. "I thought I'd come early to help with the preparations," she announced, already hanging her coat in our entryway. "I'll be staying until New Year's. I brought all my special recipes." We had planned a quiet Christmas, just the two of us, before visiting family on Christmas Day. Those plans evaporated as Sylvia took over our kitchen and invited additional family members without consulting us. When I tried to discuss the issue with Jackson later, he dismissed my concerns. "It's Christmas, Sam. Family is important this time of year. Mom just wants to make it special for us." "But we had plans of our own," I insisted. "I feel like our wishes don't matter." "You're overreacting," he replied. "It's not a big deal to adjust our plans a little." But it wasn't just a little. It was a constant adjustment, always in Sylvia's favor, never in mine. Perhaps the most hurtful incident occurred during a family reunion last summer. Jackson's cousins were discussing their favorite family traditions, and I mentioned how much I enjoyed our new tradition of Sunday morning hikes. "Oh, those won't last," Sylvia interjected with a laugh. "Jackson has never been the outdoorsy type. He gets that from his father. When he was little, we tried camping once and had to come home early because he was miserable." "Actually, Mom," Jackson corrected her, "I enjoy hiking with Sam. It's become one of my favorite parts of the week." For a moment, I felt validated, until Sylvia added, "Well, you've always been so accommodating, sweetheart. Remember how you took ballet lessons for a month because your elementary school crush was in the class?" She turned to the group. "He hated every minute, but wouldn't admit it." Everyone laughed, and the implication was clear. Jackson was only hiking to please me, just as he had only done ballet to please his childhood crush. My husband's genuine enjoyment of our time together was reduced to another example of his accommodating nature. Later that evening, I overheard a conversation that would become the breaking point. I was bringing dessert plates to the kitchen when I heard Sylvia's voice from the patio. "I'm worried about Jackson," she was saying to his aunt. "Samantha is so focused on her career. She works such long hours, and their house shows it. I stop by to help tidy up when I can, but it's not the same as having someone dedicated to creating a proper home." "Have they talked about children?" his aunt asked. "She always says someday," Sylvia replied, her voice heavy with disapproval. "But you know what that means for career women? I've been thinking it might be best if I sold my house and moved in with them. Jackson wouldn't have to eat takeout all the time, and I could create the kind of home environment he deserves." "Do you think Samantha would be on board with that?" his aunt asked skeptically. "Jackson can convince her," Sylvia said confidently. "He knows I only want what's best for them. Besides, with me there to handle the household, maybe Samantha would finally feel free to focus on starting a family." I stood frozen in the kitchen, dessert plates clutched to my chest, as the full weight of my mother-in-law's machinations became clear. This wasn't about helping us or even about downsizing her own home. This was about inserting herself permanently into our marriage, about creating the dynamic she wanted, with her as the primary woman in Jackson's life and me relegated to the role she deemed appropriate. What hurt most was the realization that Jackson might agree with her. Despite his occasional support, he consistently chose the path of least resistance, accommodating his mother's intrusions rather than standing firm on the boundaries of our marriage. That night, lying awake beside my sleeping husband, I made a decision. I needed to create options for myself, a contingency plan that would allow me to protect my independence if necessary. I loved Jackson, but I couldn't continue to be erased in my own marriage. The next day, I began my secret project. The morning after overhearing Sylvia's plans, I called in sick to work for the first time in years. I needed space to think, to process what I'd learned, and decide how to move forward. While Jackson left for school, I sat at our kitchen table with a legal pad and began to assess my situation with the same methodical approach I applied to my architectural projects. The facts were clear. I loved my husband, but our marriage had developed a structural weakness. Jackson's inability to establish boundaries with his mother had created a three-person relationship where my needs and feelings were consistently devalued. The question was whether this flaw could be repaired or if I needed to prepare for the possibility that it couldn't. I decided to pursue both paths simultaneously, work to strengthen my marriage while creating a safety net for myself if those efforts failed. The next day, I scheduled an appointment with a marriage counselor, intending to ask Jackson to join me. But before I could even broach the subject, he announced that his mother had scheduled a family dinner for that exact time to discuss some exciting news. I attended the dinner only to discover that Sylvia wanted to show us listings for houses near ours that she was considering. Jackson seemed enthusiastic, while I felt increasingly invisible. That weekend, while Jackson was at a basketball tournament with his team, I began researching properties. I wasn't looking for anything extravagant, just a small place that could be mine alone if needed. After viewing several options, I found it. A modest cottage about 20 minutes from downtown, nestled on a quarter-acre lot with mature oak trees. The house itself needed work, but the bones were good, and I could immediately envision its potential. Using money I'd saved from my year-end bonuses, funds I'd originally intended for a future family vacation home, I made an offer. It was accepted the following week. I told no one, not even Dana, my closest friend. This wasn't about creating drama or threatening my marriage. It was about reclaiming my sense of agency. Over the next several months, I developed a careful routine. I told Jackson I was working late on a major project, which wasn't entirely untrue. I simply omitted that the project was personal rather than professional. 3 evenings a week, I would drive to the cottage and work alongside the contractors I'd hired, designing and implementing renovations that transformed the space. The process was therapeutic. Each decision I made, from the open floor plan to the garden layout, was entirely mine. No one questioned my choices or suggested alternatives that would better suit someone else's preferences. As the cottage took shape, so did my confidence. I consulted with both a marriage counselor and a lawyer during this time, not because I was planning to leave Jackson, but because I needed to understand my options. The counselor suggested strategies for discussing boundaries with my husband, while the lawyer advised me on protecting my assets. Many women find themselves trapped in unhealthy situations because they didn't create an exit strategy, the lawyer told me. What you're doing isn't about giving up on your marriage. It's about ensuring you never have to choose between your self-respect and your security. Those words resonated deeply. I didn't want to leave Jackson. I wanted our marriage to thrive. But for that to happen, something fundamental needed to change in our dynamic. As our anniversary approached, I formalized the ownership of the cottage, placing it in my name only. My original plan had been to present it to Jackson as a surprise, a weekend retreat where we could reconnect away from daily pressures and rebuild our relationship on stronger foundations. I would suggest that we use the space for regular marriage maintenance, time dedicated to nurturing our connection and addressing issues before they became problems. I even prepared a letter explaining my hopes for our future, acknowledging the challenges we'd faced and expressing my commitment to working through them together. The cottage would be a symbol of new beginnings, of prioritizing our marriage above external influences. But as I put the final touches on both the cottage and my presentation, doubt crept in. Jackson had shown little interest in addressing the underlying issues in our marriage. When I'd made tentative attempts to discuss his mother's increasing presence in our lives, he brushed off my concerns or accused me of being oversensitive. Would a grand gesture really change such entrenched patterns? Still, I held on to hope. Our 5th anniversary seemed like the perfect opportunity for a reset, a moment to remember why we'd chosen each other and recommit to that choice. I carefully placed the cottage deed and keys in a decorative folder along with the letter and photos of the renovated space. It would be my anniversary gift to Jackson and potentially to our marriage. The night before our anniversary party, I drove to the cottage one last time. I walked through the rooms, appreciating how the space reflected my vision. The open kitchen with its butcher block countertops, the reading nook with built-in bookshelves, the small office where I could work when needed. Every element represented a piece of myself. In the master bedroom, I stood before the full-length mirror and made a promise to my reflection. Whatever happened next, I would not lose myself again. I would not shrink to accommodate someone else's expectations. I loved Jackson, but I also loved the woman staring back at me, the woman who had created this sanctuary, this manifestation of her own worth. As I locked up the cottage, I felt a curious sense of peace. I didn't know whether the folder in my bag would represent a new chapter in my marriage or the beginning of a different story altogether. But for the first time in months, the uncertainty didn't terrify me. I had created options for myself. Whatever came next, I would face it. Standing on the solid ground of my own making, I drove home to finish the preparations for our anniversary party. The cottage keys indeed securely tucked away in my purse. The next day would bring clarity one way or another. I was as ready as I could be. What I couldn't have prepared for was Jackson's announcement, the public declaration of a decision made without my input. The smug triumph on Sylvia's face as she watched my reaction. In an instant, my carefully constructed plans shifted. The folder in my purse no longer represented a potential weekend retreat for reconnection. It had become my declaration of independence. "You'll adjust, dear." "I always do." Sylvia's words hung in the air between us, dripping with condescension. The party continued around us, guests pretending not to notice the tension as they moved toward the dining room for cake. Jackson had already been pulled into a conversation with his uncle, leaving me standing alone with his mother. I took a slow, deliberate breath, feeling the weight of my purse against my side. The folder inside suddenly seemed to burn through the leather, demanding to be revealed. This wasn't how I'd planned to present my surprise, but plans had clearly changed. "Actually, Sylvia," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "I think we need to finish this conversation with Jackson present." Without waiting for her response, I moved across the room to where my husband stood. I gently touched his arm, interrupting his conversation. "Jackson, we need to talk." "All three of us," I said, nodding toward Sylvia, who had followed me. His brow furrowed slightly, but he nodded. "Sure, we can step into the study for a minute." I shook my head. "No, this affects everyone here. You made your announcement publicly. I think it's appropriate that mine is public too." Confusion flashed across his face, but before he could question me, I turned to address our guests. I tapped a fork against my champagne glass until the room quieted. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate with us tonight," I began, my heart pounding, but my voice clear. "As Jackson mentioned, we apparently have a double celebration happening. His mother moving in with us is certainly unexpected news to me." A murmur rippled through the room. Jackson stepped closer, concern evident in his expression. "Sam, what are you doing?" I continued as if he hadn't spoken. "Since tonight seems to be the night for surprises, I'd like to share one of my own." I reached into my purse and pulled out the folder containing the deed to my cottage. The cream-colored paper felt substantial in my hands, a physical manifestation of the boundaries I was finally asserting. "For the past 4 months, I've been working on a special project," I explained, opening the folder. "I purchased and renovated a small property near Oakwood Hills." I removed the first photo and held it up, a charming exterior shot of the cottage with its freshly painted sage green door and window boxes filled with flowers. "It's a beautiful space, completely designed to my specifications. No compromises, no adjustments to accommodate anyone else's preferences. Just mine." Jackson stared at the photo, confusion evident on his face. "I don't understand. You bought a house without telling me." "Yes," I replied simply. Just as you arranged for your mother to move into our home without consulting me. His face flushed. That's different. She's family. So am I, Jackson. Or at least I thought I was. I turned back to our guests who were watching with a mixture of discomfort and fascination. In light of tonight's announcement, I'd like to make one of my own. Sylvia is indeed welcome to move in with Jackson. And I'll be moving to my new place. The silence that followed was absolute. Sylvia's face had transformed from smug superiority to shocked disbelief. Jackson looked as though I'd physically struck him. You can't be serious, he finally managed. I've never been more serious about anything in my life, I replied, extracting the deed from the folder. This house is mine, not ours. Mine. I paid for it with my own savings, and it's titled solely in my name. I handed him the document, watching as he scanned it, reality slowly sinking in. I don't understand, he repeated. Why would you do this? If you were unhappy, why didn't you say something? The question was so absurd that a small, incredulous laugh escaped me. I have been saying something, Jackson, for years. You just haven't been listening. Our guests began to drift toward the front door, murmuring awkward goodbyes. Within minutes, only close family remained, Jackson's brother Kyle and his wife, Jackson's sister Megan, and, of course, Sylvia, who had recovered enough from her shock to find her voice. This is ridiculous, she declared, reaching for the deed in Jackson's hands. You can't possibly expect us to take this seriously. You're having a tantrum because you didn't get your way. I intercepted her hand before she could grab the document. That's exactly the problem, Sylvia. You've never taken me seriously. Neither of you have. I looked pointedly at Jackson. Every boundary I've tried to establish has been dismissed as an overreaction or an inconvenience. Kyle cleared his throat uncomfortably. Maybe we should give you two some privacy to discuss this. No need, I said calmly. The party's over anyway. Thank you all for coming. It was a clear dismissal. Megan gave me a quick, surprisingly sympathetic hug before ushering her reluctant brother toward the door. Kyle followed with his wife, leaving just the three of us, me, Jackson, and Sylvia, standing in our decorated living room. Anniversary balloons still bobbing cheerfully against the ceiling. As the front door closed behind the last guests, Sylvia's composure cracked completely. How dare you humiliate my son like this, she hissed. After everything he's done for you, this is how you repay his generosity, by embarrassing him in front of everyone we know? Mom, Jackson started, but I cut him off. Generosity, I repeated. Is that what we're calling it when someone makes unilateral decisions that affect both partners in a marriage? When they consistently prioritize their mother's wishes over their wife's feelings? That's an interesting definition of generosity, Sylvia. You've always been selfish, she spat. Always putting your career first, neglecting your home, neglecting Jackson's needs. And what exactly are Jackson's needs? I asked, turning to my husband. Because from where I stand, the only needs being prioritized in this marriage are yours, Sylvia. Jackson looked between us, conflict evident on his face. Sam, you're overreacting. I should have discussed Mom moving in with you first. I admit that. But buying a separate house, that's extreme. Is it? I asked quietly. Let me ask you something, Jackson. When exactly did you and your mother begin these months of discussion about her moving in? Because 3 months ago, you explicitly told me it would never happen. Things changed, he mumbled. Her house sold faster than expected. Her house wasn't even on the market 3 months ago, I interrupted. You lied to me, Jackson. You knew how I would react, so you and your mother made plans behind my back. And then you ambushed me with the decision at our anniversary party, in front of everyone we know. If anyone's behavior is extreme here, it's yours. Sylvia stepped between us, literally inserting herself into our conversation. Jackson was just trying to spare your feelings. He knows how difficult you can be about these things. Stop speaking for my husband, I said firmly. That's part of the problem. You're constantly inserting yourself between us, and he lets you. Don't talk to my mother that way. Jackson snapped. And there it is, I said softly. You'll defend her immediately. But where's that same defense when she undermines me? When she criticizes our home, my cooking, my career? When she shows up unannounced or rearranges our furniture without permission? You've never once taken my side in those conflicts. The truth of my words seemed to register because Jackson's anger deflated slightly. That's not fair, Sam, isn't it? I picked up the photo of my cottage and looked at it before returning my gaze to my husband. I bought this place because I needed something that was just mine. Something that couldn't be invaded or altered or criticized. I needed a space where I felt valued and respected because I haven't felt that way in our marriage for a long time. So, this is an ultimatum, he asked. Either my mother doesn't move in or you leave? I shook my head. This isn't an ultimatum, Jackson. It's a boundary. I'm no longer willing to be the third wheel in my own marriage. You have a choice to make, but so do I. And I choose not to live in an environment where I'm constantly dismissed and devalued. I gathered the deed and photos, returning them to my purse. Then I picked up an overnight bag I'd packed that morning, another part of my contingency plan, and headed for the door. Where are you going? Jackson asked, panic finally entering his voice. To my cottage, I replied simply. I think we all need some space to consider what happens next. As I opened the front door, I heard Sylvia's voice behind me. This is ridiculous, Jackson. She's bluffing. She'll be back tomorrow once she calms down. I didn't hear my husband's response. I closed the door behind me, walked to my car, and drove away from the home that had ceased to feel like mine long ago. The cottage welcomed me with quiet solitude. I dropped my overnight bag in the entryway and moved through the rooms, turning on lamps as I went. The soft lighting cast a warm glow over the spaces I had so carefully designed. For the first time that evening, I felt like I could breathe properly. I kicked off my heels and curled up on the window seat in the living room, gazing out at the moonlit garden. My phone had been buzzing almost continuously since I left, messages from Jackson, from Dana, from other friends who had witnessed the evening's drama. I wasn't ready to respond to any of them. Instead, I sat in the silence, allowing myself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. There was sadness, certainly, grief for the marriage I had thought we had and for the future we had planned together. But beneath the sadness was something unexpected, relief. After years of compromise that felt increasingly one-sided, I had finally stood up for myself. Around midnight, headlights swept across the front window as a car pulled into the driveway. I wasn't surprised when I heard Jackson's key in the lock. I had given him a copy in my original plan to present the cottage as our shared retreat. He stood in the doorway, taking in the space with wide eyes before his gaze settled on me. How did you find me? I asked, though I already knew the answer. The address was on the deed, he replied. He hesitated before stepping fully inside. Sam, this place it's beautiful. Thank you, I said simply. You did all this yourself? The renovations. I nodded. I worked with contractors, but the design is all mine. He moved slowly through the open-concept living area, taking in the details, the built-in bookshelves, the exposed beams, the kitchen with its farmhouse sink and butcher block counters. This must have taken months, he said finally. For months, I confirmed. 3 evenings a week, plus weekends when you were coaching. Understanding dawned on his face. The late nights at work, the weekend meetings, you were here. Yes. He sank onto the sofa across from my window seat, looking suddenly exhausted. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have listened? I asked gently. Or would you have dismissed it as an overreaction, just like you've dismissed every other concern I've raised about our marriage? Our marriage was fine, he protested, but there was uncertainty in his voice. Was it really? Because from where I stand, our marriage has been slowly eroding for years. Every time your mother crossed a boundary and you defended her instead of us, another piece crumbled away. You're exaggerating. Mom can be difficult sometimes. She rearranged our furniture when we weren't home, Jackson. She criticized my cooking, my housekeeping, my career choices. She showed up unannounced and expected to be accommodated no matter what plans we had. And you never, not once, stood up to her. She's my mother, he said, as if that explained everything. And I'm your wife, I countered. Or at least I thought I was your partner. But partners make decisions together. They don't ambush each other with life-changing announcements at parties. He had the grace to look ashamed. I should have talked to you about Mom moving in. That was wrong, and I'm sorry. But you're not sorry about the decision itself, I noted. Just the way you announced it. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know what you want me to say, Sam. She's my mother. She needs a place to live. She has a place to live. She chose to sell it without consulting us, without consulting me, because she wanted to insert herself permanently into our marriage, and you enabled that choice. That's not fair. She's getting older. The house was too much for her to maintain. There are other options between too much house and moving in with us, I pointed out. A condo, a retirement community, an apartment near us, but not with us. Options we could have discussed together if either of you had bothered to include me in the conversation. Silence fell between us as Jackson absorbed my words. Outside, an owl hooted softly. Where's your mother now? I asked finally. At our house. She insisted on staying to help clean up after the party. I nodded, unsurprised. And what did she say when you left to come here? His expression told me everything I needed to know. She thinks I'm being ridiculous, I guessed, throwing a tantrum. She probably told you not to chase after me, that I'd come crawling back once I calmed down. Something like that, he admitted. And yet here you are. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Because despite what you seem to think, I do care about our marriage. I love you, Sam. I know you do, I said softly. But love isn't enough if there's no respect, and you haven't respected me as your partner for a long time. That's not true, he protested. Isn't it? You made a major life decision without consulting me. You lied to me about your intentions. You allowed your mother to criticize and undermine me repeatedly without ever standing up for me. How is any of that respectful? He was silent, unable to counter my points. I love you too, Jackson, I continued. But I can't continue in a marriage where I'm constantly the one expected to bend, to adjust, to accommodate. I need a partner who puts our relationship first. So, what are you saying? This is it? 5 years of marriage and you're just walking away. I shook my head. I'm not walking away. I'm standing firm. There's a difference. I moved from the window seat to sit beside him on the sofa, close but not touching. I want our marriage to work, I said honestly. But for that to happen, things need to change. Real, substantive changes, not just temporary adjustments until we fall back into old patterns. What kind of changes? He asked wearily. First, marriage counseling. Non-negotiable. We need a neutral third party to help us establish healthy boundaries and communication patterns. He nodded reluctantly. Okay, what else? Second, your mother cannot move in with us. Not now, not ever. It would be disastrous for our marriage. His expression hardened. She's already sold her house, Sam. Where is she supposed to go? As I said before, there are other options. We can help her find a place nearby if that's what she wants. But our home needs to be our sanctuary, not a battlefield. She's going to be hurt, he said, disappointed. Yes, she will. And you'll need to be the one to set that boundary with her, not me. That's the third change. I'm done being the bad guy, the obstacle between you and your mother. If we're going to rebuild our marriage, you need to start prioritizing us. Jackson was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. I could see the conflict in him, the lifetime of conditioning to put his mother's feelings first warring with a recognition that our marriage was genuinely at risk. I don't know if I can do that, he finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. His honesty hurt, but I appreciated it. I know. That's why I bought this place. I needed to create options for myself in case you couldn't, or wouldn't, choose our marriage. So, what happens now? He asked. Now, we take some time. I'm going to stay here for a while and you should go home. Talk to your mother. Think about what you want and what you're willing to do to save our marriage. If you decide you want to try, my first 2 conditions stand, counseling and your mother finding her own place. If those aren't acceptable to you, then we need to have a different conversation. And if I agree, will you come home? I shook my head. Not right away. I think we need the separation right now. Time to reset and reflect. But I would commit to the process, to working through our issues with professional help. He nodded slowly, processing everything I'd said. Then he stood, clearly preparing to leave. For what it's worth, he said, pausing at the door. I am sorry about tonight, the announcement. I knew you wouldn't be happy about Mom moving in, but I thought once it was settled, you'd adjust. I didn't consider how disrespectful that was. Thank you for acknowledging that, I said. It's a start. After he left, I locked the door and returned to my window seat. The confrontation had been draining, but necessary. For the first time in years, I'd expressed my needs clearly and set firm boundaries. Whether Jackson could respect those boundaries remained to be seen, but I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my voice in our relationship. As I prepared for bed in my new space, I felt a curious sense of peace. Whatever happened next, I knew I would be okay. I had created this sanctuary for myself, this tangible proof that I could stand on my own if needed. It wasn't the outcome I had hoped for when I purchased the cottage, but it had become something equally valuable, a foundation for my own strength and independence. I fell asleep that night, not knowing whether my marriage would survive, but certain that I would either way. 3 months passed like a slow turning page. I settled into life at the cottage, finding comfort in the quiet routine I established. Mornings began with coffee on the back porch, watching the sun filter through the oak trees. Evenings ended with books in the window seat or plans spread across my small home office desk. The solitude, once unimaginable, became a kind of healing. I threw myself into work during those months, earning praise for a sustainable housing project that incorporated many of the design elements I'd tested in my own cottage. My boss noticed the renewed energy and focus I brought to the firm. "Whatever's changed in your personal life," she commented during a project review, "it seems to be fueling your creativity. This is some of your best work." The irony wasn't lost on me. By stepping away from a situation that had diminished me, I had reclaimed parts of myself that had been slowly eroding: my confidence, my creative vision, my voice. Jackson and I maintained careful contact during our separation. Weekly coffee meetings in neutral locations where we discussed practical matters and gradually deeper issues. The first few meetings were strained, filled with awkward silences and careful politeness. But as weeks passed, something shifted. After my ultimatum that night at the cottage, Jackson had returned home to find Sylvia rearranging our bedroom furniture to make space for her vanity. According to him, seeing her moving our personal items without permission, something she'd done countless times before, suddenly looked different through the lens of our conversation. I asked her to stop, he told me during our third coffee meeting. She acted like I was being ridiculous, said she was just trying to help. For the first time, I could see what you'd been talking about all these years. That small recognition represented a significant breakthrough. It led to Jackson's reluctant but genuine agreement to try marriage counseling. We began sessions with Dr. Winters, a therapist specializing in family boundaries. In our first session, Jackson admitted, "I've always taken the path of least resistance with my mother. It was easier to let Sam adjust than to challenge Mom's behavior." "And how has that strategy worked for your marriage?" Dr. Winters asked. Jackson looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years. "It hasn't," he acknowledged. "I've been avoiding short-term discomfort at the cost of long-term damage." Those counseling sessions became sacred space, the only place where we could safely unpack years of accumulated resentments and misunderstandings. We learned to recognize destructive patterns, to communicate needs without accusation, to listen without defensiveness. Progress with Sylvia came more slowly. Her initial reaction to our separation was predictably dramatic: accusations, tears, health complaints that mysteriously intensified whenever Jackson mentioned boundaries. She refused to consider alternative living arrangements, insisting that moving in with us had been the plan all along. "She's using the same tactics that have always worked before," I pointed out during a counseling session. "Emotional manipulation to get what she wants." "I see that now," Jackson admitted. "But what am I supposed to do? She's already sold her house." Dr. Winters helped Jackson craft a compassionate but firm response. He would help his mother find suitable housing, but she would not be moving in with us. Period. Sylvia's resistance was formidable. She cycled through guilt, anger, martyrdom, and even attempts to recruit other family members to her cause. Jackson wavered at times, the lifetime habit of accommodating his mother difficult to break. But when she showed up at our house unannounced one Sunday with a moving truck and boxes, claiming she'd misunderstood the timeline, he finally stood firm. Mom, this isn't happening, he told her. I found 3 excellent options for senior living communities. Sylvia eventually agreed to tour the senior communities Jackson had researched. She eventually selected one that offered independent living apartments with optional social activities, though not without pointing out repeatedly what a sacrifice she was making for Jackson's happiness. By the 3rd month of our separation, tangible changes had taken root. Jackson and I were communicating more honestly than we had in years. Sylvia had moved into her new apartment, still manipulative, but with less direct access to our daily lives. The cottage had served its purpose as a sanctuary during the storm. But I found myself increasingly ready to consider next steps. On the day of Sylvia's move to the senior community, Jackson came to the cottage. I invited him in for the first time since our confrontation 3 months earlier. "It's done," he said, accepting the cup of coffee I offered. "Mom's settled in her new place. She's already joined the community garden club and met a neighbor who plays bridge." "How does it feel?" I asked. He considered the question carefully. "Complicated. Guilty. Relieved. Proud. Sad. All at once. But mostly, I feel like I can breathe again. Like I finally started acting like an adult in my relationship with her." We sat in companionable silence, sipping our coffee. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the living room floor. "I've been thinking," Jackson said finally, "about our future." I nodded, encouraging him to continue. "These past months have been the hardest of my life," he admitted, but also clarifying. "I've realized how much I took you for granted. How I expected you to accommodate everyone else's needs while ignoring your own. I don't want to be that husband anymore." "I've done a lot of thinking, too," I said, "about what I need from our marriage and what I'm willing to give. About whether we can rebuild what's been broken." "And what have you concluded?" he asked, vulnerability evident in his expression. "That I miss you," I said simply. "Not the dynamic we had before. That wasn't healthy for either of us. But I miss my partner, the man I fell in love with. I think he's finding his way back." Jackson reached across the table and took my hand. "I'd like to come home," he said softly. "If you're ready." I squeezed his hand, but didn't immediately agree. "I think we need to be careful about next steps. We've made progress, but these patterns were years in the making. They won't be resolved in 3 months. What do you suggest?" "A gradual transition. We continue counseling. You stay over here sometimes. I stay at the house sometimes. We date each other again. Rebuild trust before we fully reunite." He nodded, understanding the wisdom in taking things slowly. "And the cottage?" I looked around at the space I'd created, the sanctuary that had sheltered me during one of the most difficult periods of my life. "I'm keeping it," I said firmly. "Not as an escape hatch, but as a reminder of my independence. Maybe someday it becomes a rental property or a weekend retreat for both of us. But for now, it remains mine." To his credit, Jackson didn't argue. "That seems fair. You've created something beautiful here, something that's entirely yours. I wouldn't want you to give that up." We spent that afternoon talking, really talking, about our hopes for the future, the lessons we'd learned during our separation, the boundaries we needed to maintain going forward. It wasn't a magical reconciliation, but it felt like the beginning of something authentic and mutual. 2 weeks later, we celebrated our anniversary again. Not the grand party of 3 months ago, but a quiet dinner for 2 at our favorite restaurant. No audience, no performances, no surprises. Just us. "To new beginnings," Jackson toasted, raising his glass to mine. "And hard-earned wisdom," I added. The following weekend, we met at the cottage to discuss renovation plans for our main house. Jackson had suggested creating a dedicated office space for me there, acknowledging my need for a professional sanctuary within our shared home. As we sat at the small dining table reviewing floor plans, I realized how far we'd come. 3 months ago, I couldn't imagine a future where Jackson would genuinely respect my boundaries. Now, we were collaboratively designing spaces that honored both our needs. "What do you think about converting the guest room?" he asked, sketching a potential layout. "It has the best natural light, and we rarely have overnight guests anyway." "What about your mother?" I asked the question, a test of sorts. "Mom has her own place now," he replied without hesitation. If she visits, she can stay in a hotel like any other out-of-town guest. Our home is for us. I smiled, hearing the clarity in his voice. We still had work to do, boundaries to reinforce, patterns to rewire. But in that moment, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: hope. Not the desperate hope that things might someday change, but the grounded hope that comes from witnessing change already in progress. Our marriage had been broken, then deliberately, painstakingly rebuilt on a stronger foundation. The cracks would always be visible if you looked closely enough, reminders of what we'd almost lost, but the structure itself was sounder than before. As we continued discussing renovation plans, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. Standing up for myself had been terrifying but necessary. Creating options had given me the strength to set boundaries, and those boundaries, painful as they were to establish, had ultimately saved our marriage rather than ending it. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. Those don't exist in real life. But it was something better. An authentic relationship between two imperfect people committed to growing together rather than apart. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries in your relationships, especially with family? What gave you the courage to finally stand up for yourself? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more real-life experiences. Thank you for listening to mine. And remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do in a relationship is simply to say, "This isn't working for me anymore."